Ladies and gentlemen, you are looking live. Well, you're not looking live. I just always wanted to be Brent Musburger from the NFL Today in 1984, but we are here in the GratCast studios. I am Ernie Green. This is the debut episode of Inside the Distance, and basically what we're going to do here every week is we're going to talk to some interesting people about interesting things, and I know I have a presence. I grew up in Buffalo. I live in Phoenix, big into boxing. We have a lot of different people who are going to be in here interesting, but I just want to make sure that people from Arizona are going to be interested in the people from Buffalo and vice versa. So everybody that's going to be in here is going to have an interesting story to tell, and that's the goal of the podcast. We're going to be here every week, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. So really quickly, get the particulars out of the way. Gratwick Inside the Distance is presented by Gratwick. My friends at Gratwick are building an audience and artist-owned studio system where creators are free to tell their stories on their terms. Inside the Gratwick Discord, you'll find nightly live shows, giveaways, a supportive community, and regular game nights. Transparency and accountability are part of the entertainment experience. Join the Gratwick Discord community today and tell us what you're creating. And also, in addition to the live podcast, which we're doing now, it'll be available the next day anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. But if you want to listen or engage with the show live, which you're able to do, there's two ways to do it, by the way. You can actually come into the room and ask a question like it's an actual phone conversation. We also have a chat going if you don't feel comfortable doing that, where you can ask Dave or myself a question. Ask Dave a question. He's like 30 times more interesting than I am. So ask Dave questions. Don't ask me questions. But if you want to do that, jump in the live server where you are. So every Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, we will be here. When I decided to start this endeavor, there was literally one and only one person who I wanted to start this with. And I'm glad he said yes, because I'm really not sure if I would have said yes if he said no. So I'm going to give you a really quick introduction to him, and I'm sure he can expound on himself more than I can. But Dave Levinthal has been a colleague and a friend of mine since my freshman year of college. Maybe we started off together at the Tonawanda News. Dave has gone on to bigger and better things in the journalism industry, which is awesome. And in addition to that, we'll talk a lot about his rise in journalism and the way journalism is now, especially where it was compared to when we started back in 1997-ish. And also, we're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills, of course. And I'm not going to talk about the head coach. I'm in a real good mood today, so I'm really excited about this episode. I want to be in a good mood. I don't want to drop any F-bombs on my first podcast ever, so we're going to avoid that. We're going to talk about our love and the history of the Buffalo Bills. Dave actually came out and visited me in Phoenix in 2008, and he saw, along with a bunch of other people, Trent Edwards' career, as Mike Tyson would say, fade to oblivion when he got hit and the 4-0 Bills crumbled, and that wasn't fun. But it's a lot more fun to be a Bills fan now, and I'm going to stop babbling. Dave, thank you so much for showing up today, man. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing wonderfully. You flatter me and you warm my heart, Ernie. Thanks a lot.
At least I warmed somebody's heart, which is good. So, Dave and I. So I'm gonna tell a really quick story about Dave, which ties into something else. I was by chance. I was in Nashville when Connor McDavid had his second NHL game. It was at Nashville, and I could tell when he was on the ice, he wasn't the best player on the ice yet. It was his second NHL game, but he was like the most talented person on the ice by far. And tying this into David's, when I met David in 1997, 1998, I felt the same way about him. We worked at a newspaper together where we had a lot of really good journalists, and they're still good journalists now, and I don't want to disparage them, but 18-year-old David at the time was more talented than all of us. He was the most talented person there, and I feel that, and the way his career has gone since, I feel the same exact way now. That was my first impression of Dave. He was so professional. He was so, he was just really, really good at such a young age. To the point where I was like insanely jealous of how good he was. Dave, at what age did you decide that you wanted to be a journalist?
I decided that I wanted to be a journalist probably around the ripe old age of 10 years old. And in a way, it was journalism that itself that got me interested in journalism, because back in 1989, when I got my first Buffalo News paper route, you could still do a thing like that when you were 10 years old and, sock a few dollars away to go down the street and buy a box of football cards or whatever the heck you wanted to do. And, I thought this was my ticket to freedom. And as a 10-year-old entrepreneur, it seemed like, really the way to go. And that this was just one step closer to, breaking the bondages of my parents and buying a car and all the things that you could dream of. You could just feel. You could see the kids down the street doing it, and you knew that if you had the financial means to do so, then you were going to get there. But a funny thing along the way happened, which was that I started reading that newspaper that I was delivering. And at the end of my paper route, there was a little market called the Yellow Goose Market on Kenmore Avenue on the line between the town of Tonawanda and the city of Buffalo. And occasionally I'd stop there and I'd get a Pepsi or an orange juice, something to eat, maybe play the Joust arcade game that they had there, my fave. And I'd sit there at the table and I'd start to read the newspaper. And I was fascinated by the notion that, here in this thing that I was delivering, there were these stories from not only around the community, but around the world. And I was particularly fascinated with the stories coming out of Washington, D.C. And there was one particular writer with a very Buffalo name, Jerry Zremski. And I'm like, oh, this guy must be really cool. He's there in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, and he's writing all these stories about all these things I don't understand happening in the world of politics. And there's this thing called Congress and a thing called the Supreme Court. And I know what the president is, but I don't really know what he does. And I started learning from the newspaper. And my uncle used to tell me that the old adage about newspapers, which is that newspapers are the poor man's university. And it was also the young man's university at that time, too, for me. And a bunch of stuff that I was not learning in school and that wasn't being discussed, when I went to soccer practice or played with my friends or whatnot. And I felt like I was in on some kind of a secret. And that just kind of got me hooked on the idea that, hey, instead of delivering these papers, maybe one day I actually want to write for one.
Very nice. So what was the first newspaper that you actually wrote an article for?
Well, I can, you might recognize it. It's called the Tonawanda News. And, and I was a decent student and all, but one subject that I didn't particularly have an affinity for or an aptitude in was math. And which may sound funny considering that I write a lot about money and politics and financial stuff, but hey, trigonometry, algebra, totally lost on me. But I had this wonderful math teacher in 10th grade at Kenmore West Senior High School. His name was Mr. Ash, Steve Ash. And he was just the most spirited, positive, jovial guy. I could have walked into class every day and said, Mr. Ash, I hate math. This is the worst subject in the world. And he would find some way, I did not do that, mind you, but he would find some way if I did to try to make the situation better. And I really liked him, and we got along quite well, better than probably I ever had with a math teacher, then or beyond. And he started talking to me about journalism because I had mentioned to him that I was very interested in doing it. When he asked, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you looking to maybe go to college for? I said, I would just really love to write news articles about anything. I had taken a journalism class, kind of a half-year class, and did some basic journalism things and wrote a couple of fake news articles, not in the sense, in the terms that we put them in fake news today, but
gotcha.
practice articles. But
you got to preface that, by the way, Dave, with the way things are going, but I digress. Go ahead.
I sure do. But Mr. Ash he was very kind, and he said, hey, I know an editor at the Tonawanda News, and I used to read the Tonawanda News, and some of my neighbors got it, and I'd pick it up even at the newsstand sometime. And I said, well, that's amazing. What would I do? What can I send them? Do I need to talk to them? And he said, I'll give him a shout, and we'll see what happens. So anyway, Mr. Ash gets back to me about a week later, and he says, hey, would you be willing, over your Easter break, which was 2 weeks that year, in April 1995, and he said, "Hey, let's do this. You could go there if you can get there at 7 in the morning every day and work until about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll put you to work. They'll have you doing things. I don't know exactly what is going to be going on, but you'll be able to do some stuff." And so, all right, game on. Get there at 7 o'clock in the morning on my first day. Guy by the name of Joe Jenko is there, and he shows me around, and it's like, all right, this is where the paper is printed, and here's where we write stories, and these are the phones that we answer, and you know, advertising department, all the trappings of your standard Perry White Superman Clark Kent, newsroom. This is pre-email. This is pre-cell phone, so things are pretty old school. And what I mainly did for the 9 out of the 10 working days that I was there was I answered some phones. I transcribed some quotes, something I had never done before, from reporters literally calling their stories in. Helped to make a couple of phone calls for articles that I handed off the information to some of the reporters. I read press releases. And on the final day that I was there, they let me write a news story about 2 high school students in the city of Tonawanda, Tonawanda High School in the city of Tonawanda. And it was about some cool community service things that they were doing. Well, I would have thought that I had won the Pulitzer Prize by seeing my article the next day in print on page 7 of that Saturday edition of the Tonawanda News. And it was like an addiction. I knew that this was what I wanted to do, not just because of the rush of it, but because of something I did and some interviews that I conducted. I was able to communicate information. I was able to tell a story. I was able to meet some really cool people, and I just wanted to do it. So I said, well, thank you so much for this internship, but how do I get to come back? What can I do? And they basically said, well, give it another year. And when you're 16 years old, 16 and a half, we might be able to hire you to cover some sports. And we pay about $25 an article, and you'll get some stories in, get to cover some basketball, get to cover some baseball, softball. You'll have a good time. And literally a year to the day, called them back up and said, all right, guys, I'm ready. Do you have any work for me? And they said, yeah, I think we'll hire you on. And kind of the rest is history at the Tonawanda News.
My favorite article that you wrote, kind of how I got myself introduced to you. I remember, you being I was an avid reader of the Tonawanda News, and I think the greatest quote, it's still to this day, it just makes me laugh, was when you guys did in 1997 the April Fool's edition, and you talked about how there was gang wars in Kenmore West, and how the gangs had come to a truce. And I'll never forget the quote the fake guy said. He goes, "Now I don't have to bring my AK-47 to class anymore. I have whore violence." I don't know why, but that has stuck with me like this entire time, because that was hilarious. And I think it was just too. I think they just went too over the top. Had the main article not been about Disney coming to Buffalo or Niagara Falls, I think the rest of it was like believable. And that one, that kind of made it over the top, like April Fool's. But that was such a well done newspaper, and it was hilarious. And that, how much fun did you have writing that quote unquote article?
I think I was too naive and too stupid to know that this might actually get me in trouble, or this probably wasn't the best look in the entire world for a daily newspaper coming out of a city. But that was something that you could not only get away with in 1997 as a newspaper, but also was done a little bit more frequently than you might think. Now, of course, there's a publication here in 2022 for every different type of news preference, every different comedy taste, whatever news organization you want to look for, you got it. But back then there was not. And so for a general readership type of newspaper to go and actually do something like that and kind of walk pretty close to the line to being at least quasi-believable. And I'm sure, I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure some people were absolutely positively duped. That was pretty darn fun, and probably the only time that I truly did dabble in fake news in my young career.
That is awesome. Also, so I'm going to ask you. This question has kind of popped in my head. I wasn't going to ask. Like I told you, my first impression of you. Do you remember meeting me and your first impression of me?
Oh yeah, your my first impression of you was exactly what I love about you and why we've been friends forever and ever. I'm like, this guy is great. He knows everything about sports. He's hilarious. I want to be friends with this dude. And well, that's all it really took.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And you know, the funny thing is back then they would pay us like $25 in the summer because we were both off. And you and I really got to be friends during 1998 when the World Cup was going on. We were both out of college. They would pay us like looking back, it's like we thought it was the greatest money in the world. And looking back, they were just pawning stuff off that they didn't want to do so they could go enjoy their summer vacation. But so Dave and I during the summer, Dave would man the news desk and I would man the sports desk. And then Dave was this giant soccer fan, and he's like, and there wasn't much going on in the summer either way, sports or news. So we just kind of got to hang out the World Cup. But I'm indebted to Dave because he explained like a lot of soccer to me, which actually helped me because I was covering soccer. I'm like, my soccer stories when I first started were just terrible because I knew nothing about the sport really. I'm like, yeah, this dude scored, then the other guy scored, and here's a quote from the coach, and then the game ended. But now learn about like offsides and traps and just setting the way that soccer's set up, how you set up shots and how you like how Italy plays the slow game. I remember all those things, and that was
Right.
a fun summer. I do remember the year after. This is a hilarious story. Is that I forgot the publication it was exactly. Maybe it was called. We had a weekly publication. It might have been Night and Day, but I got an interview to work that for the whole summer. And the people back then, there was a lot of negativity, I think, in the news business in general, and it kind of seeped into where we were working. And I don't want to name names or anything like that, but I was there for an interview, and there was 4 people there, and 3 of them were that total typical, like everything stinks, like I'm just negative about the business and whatnot. And I was like really excited to do this. I'm like, this is going to be a great opportunity because keeping things tight and meeting deadlines. If you can do that, that's half the journalism business, in my opinion. If you can do those things, and I got this interview for this thing, and I was so excited because I thought I nailed it. And then, like the next day, I got a phone call. They're like, "We're really sorry you didn't get the job." And I was incensed because the only other 3 people I saw were these people that just didn't care about anything. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm really passionate about this. And I'm like, who got the job? They're like, Dave Levinthal. I'm like, oh, never mind. Yeah, that's good. I thought, I just remember like I was so upset that I didn't get the job. Once they said you got it, I'm like, yeah, that obviously Dave is way more qualified than I am or anybody else. Is you did spend the summer doing that? Was it Night and Day, that publication?
Well, it was so it was a couple things. Somebody originally had the job and dropped out at the last minute, so they were scrambling to find basically anyone to go and cover, and then it was the Wheatfield. Oh man, you're catching me flat. It was the weekly Wheatfield paper too that they needed to basically have an editor for. So it was just kind of a right place at the right time type of situation, and I was all too happy to make my $7 an hour or whatever salary they were paying
Yeah,
at the time. And
it was 725. I know that for a fact.
well,
Seven
you
twenty-five.
must have gotten a raise if you were making 725 because that
No,
was more than I was
I didn't
making.
I didn't get the job, so I didn't. Maybe I didn't get the job, so I didn't get. I got zero. So
Yeah, it was not anything to write home to or that was gonna pay your bills if that was a regular job. But man, did I learn a ton. And really it was an incredible don't want to imbue too much religiosity here, but if one is going to count his blessings, I will on this one because I learned so much about the news business in such a condensed period of time that when I went back to college and I went to Syracuse University, I felt like I had crammed in like a year's worth of education from the vaunted SI Newhouse School of Public Communication. I mean, I learned more in 3-4 months working at the Tonawanda News in that capacity than I did paying way too much money to go to classes where I was learning a fourth of what I was learning if hour by hour that I would have learned in a newsroom environment like that. And because you learn every aspect of the publication. and it was sort of like a total body workout. If you're going to the gym and you're doing, just one thing, well, you're going to overtrain one area of your body, and then everything is going to be left to go to seed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you're in a newsroom, just like if you're working out and you truly have holistic fitness, or you have a holistic news experience, two sides of the same coin. And that's really what I was able to do. Is you learned how to interview, you learned how to handle difficult sources, you learned how to lay the paper out, you learned how to copy edit, you learned language, you learned how to relate with other people who were perhaps difficult coworkers, and most importantly, you began to learn how to tell stories in a style that connects with readers, and learn how to tell stories that on your best day are really going to connect with them at a powerful level. It might be a very visceral level. It might be through comedy. It might be through the telling of a tale about an athlete, either through a game story or a profile. And on any given day, you have no idea what might just come out of the ether, and you're going to be there and be called upon to write about. And probably the most profound example of that was when I was covering a softball game. And in the midst of covering the softball game, I heard probably, to this day, the loudest explosion that I had ever heard in my life. And, so I looked around. I mean, you felt it. It felt like just a blast wave coming through you. And a couple of blocks away on Delaware Avenue in the village of Kenmore, there was a paint factory, paint warehouse that had exploded. There had been a very small fire there, but as you can only imagine, with the fumes and the chemicals and everything that was being stored in there, when it went up, it went up. And to make a very long story short, still to this day, one of the most sad and vivid days of my life. A firefighter from the village of Kenmore ended up dying. There were 6 others who were injured. And I can just remember getting in my 1979 Oldsmobile Delta 88 and racing as close as I could get, and stopping only when like the flames were too close and the heat was too hot, and I couldn't go any further without, being in danger. But I didn't realize that until I was there. And then figuring out, because I had never been in a situation like this before, I had never reported on a fire that had literally in a moment's time consumed an entire city block. Didn't know what to do. So you just kind of make it up as you go. You copy what you've seen others do. You use your instincts and try in that moment to do everything that you can to do the core thing that you're there to do, which is tell a story. And yes, this again was in the Paleolithic days of journalism, where there were no cell phones and there was no way to, communicate as you are there. So literally I had to scrawl everything out in my notebook and writing page after page after page. And, finally after an hour and a half or so, finding a payphone at the Wilson Farms a few blocks away and calling into the desk and just reading stuff out of your notebook that person on the other end of the line just turned into copy that would, a few hours later appear in the newspaper. It was really remarkable, but that crystallized for me okay, well, this is what you need to do. This is your job, and this is a terrible situation, and people really need to know what happened, and you need to answer basic questions about how it happened, why it happened, what you saw, what other people saw, what they experienced, and then the aftermath too. So that was a day that really helped color and define the early parts of my career, and that oftentimes when I was faced with other challenging situations that I would lean on from time to time, and even still do to this day.
So that's a crazy story. And I actually remember. I don't remember the particulars, but I remember when that happened. I didn't know you were at a softball game. That was a crazy story, because I was at another softball game that day, and I remember that happening.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stinks is something that you said. I mean, I want to go in the Daily Orange here pretty briefly after this, but you get the experience by working at these small time newspapers, and the fact that they're going away is just such a detriment to journalism in general, because that's where you get that's where you get like your hair wet. You know what I'm saying? That's where the place you go. And like you said, you were at the Daily Orange, but there's just no possible way a university with so many people can really get down and help you the way that a small town newspaper does. Not you, just anybody in general. So my memories of Tonawanda News are the same as yours. Just learning the business by a bunch of people who really, really knew how to write articles and keep contacts and find contacts and deal with it. There's nowhere better than the Tonawandas to deal with miserable people. I think we can both agree on that. Especially I don't think
them all.
I don't think there was ever a cross section of miserable people than Tonawanda news readers in the late '90s, early 2000s. So if you can deal with them, you can deal with anybody.
You can really deal with anyone.
So yeah.
I could agree more.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I could not agree more. And yeah. I met some of the most incredible characters that I'm sure you met half of them yourself, and 1,000 more during your time working there, and it was just. It was fodder, the best of fodder for a young budding news reporter who wanted to see it all. He really did.
Yeah, nothing was better, honestly. Growing up and doing that. So from there, really quickly, Daily Orange. The Daily Orange is they call it a student newspaper. It's a newspaper. It is not like, a student newspaper is like something that comes out like once a week and there's really no editing. Like that Daily Orange, even to this day, is just like it's a newspaper. Like you guys are printing, you guys are in-depth features and you're doing investigative journalism, and it's always been the same way. What is your favorite memory from being at Syracuse in the Daily Orange?
Oh man, I mean, do we have 7 hours here? I mean,
if it's interesting, yes.
I mean, I'll say this, the culture there, I was very lucky. In an essence, I went to Syracuse, because it's a great university, and yes, it has a very good journalism school, and, I was there to also study politics. I had a political philosophy major, which I probably learned more from than my newspaper journalism degree that I did, but where I really learned the things I needed to know and have the experiences I needed to experience in order to set me on a path to get into journalism full-time professionally was at the Daily Orange. And there were, the coolest thing is that there were so many other people there for that very reason. And, lots of individual memories that also too will stick with me for my life. I spent several weeks in the state of Chiapas in Mexico at a time when there was an armed indigenous revolt there, and did that with the Daily Orange because there were these folks from Syracuse who were going down there to basically serve as peacekeeper witnesses, and thought that this would be an amazing story to tell, including a couple of students who were there. And, there I was in the midst reporting on a veritable armed rebellion that was very much a thing in the mid to late 90s, with some incredible things happening there, and was able to see things that no college student ever really gets a chance to see, at least in the capacity of being a journalist. On the complete other end of the spectrum was one time where I found myself while I was working on a story with some guy from ESPN now. What's his name? Jeff Passan. You may have heard of him.
Jeff Passan, yeah.
Passan was one of my sports editors on a staff that also included, Greg Bishop from Sports Illustrated.
Sports Illustrated, yes.
Eli Saslow from the Washington Post, who's won a Pulitzer Prize and was a finalist for 3 others. I mean, it was just this insane group of absolutely amazing sports journalists in particular. Chris Snow, who's one of my best friends in the world, his son is my godson. He was assistant sports editor. He's now the assistant general manager for the Calgary Flames after, several years as an incredible journalist working for the Boston Globe, covering the Red Sox. So, all these guys are just like these goofs, who are 18, 19 years old. And Hassan and I, we got a tip that the then World Wrestling Federation was considering Syracuse for WrestleMania. The Carrier Dome is there, 50,000 people, indoor arena. It was kind of, checking all the boxes for the WWF at that point in time. And obviously has, one hell of a fan base in New York and Southern Ontario and whatnot. So, all right, this is really amazing. Nobody knows about this. Nobody's talking about it. This is somebody who's, real kind of just deep in the weeds that we just happen to know. And so, well, Ernie, it turns out that it's true. And we're able to get sourcing that indicates to us that, yes, the WWF is actively negotiating with the university to make this happen. So the only way that we really knew to seal the deal in terms of figuring out if this was real or not was to get to some of the wrestlers. So there was a house show coming to Onondaga War Memorial Stadium in Syracuse. This is 1999. And Passon and I go down to the War Memorial Stadium, and WWF is doing their house show, and a very young Dwayne Johnson is there, amid many other wrestlers, but he was sort of the headliner. So after the show was over, we had gotten press passes, and we kind of, went back into the press area, not too many people there, so we just snuck into the locker room, and there he is, The Rock, in all of his glory, butt-ass naked, and we're like, this is our moment. So we go up to The Rock and we say, hello, Mr. Rock. I'm Dave, and this is Jeff from the Daily Orange. And we started talking to him. And for about a half hour, he holds court and completely gets out of character, and he just starts talking business. And he confirms, The Rock, what more do you need? The Rock confirms that, yes, WrestleMania, Syracuse, definite possibility. And it would be great because when I played football, I'm talking as The Rock now, when I played football and I came to the Carrier Dome, such great fans, and it was such a great atmosphere, and I can only imagine what it's going to be now. And he just goes off. And he's disappointed. You can tell that he's just really sad as a human being, as an individual, not a wrestler, not an actor, an entertainer, that this is probably not going to happen. And of course we asked, well, why? What is preventing this from happening? And he said, well, the university doesn't want it. They don't want to be associated with what we do. And so we
really quickly, I gotta imagine that kind of turned up the antennas for you and Jeff, huh?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And so we bust out this huge story, front page, two giant stories that blow this out of the water. And I'll never forget, that morning, probably about, 7:30, getting a call on my landline phone in my dorm room at Booth Hall on Comstock Avenue in Syracuse, and it's the chancellor, and the chancellor, I think, was half aghast that we had written a story, and half impressed that his journalism school, at least in his opinion, was worth a damn that they were putting out journalists who were scooping the university on their own news. But it was really the talk of the campus for a solid week, and that was a moment when I realized, wow, okay, we can write things here that really cause people to not only take notice, but we can write things that don't just cover news, but they create news, that they make news. And that story, along with a few others at the Daily Orange, really crystallized for me the notion that investigative reporting was something that maybe I wouldn't do for my whole career, and probably not something I would do for a long while, but that I could kind of weave into the repertoire of what I do. That no matter what I'm doing, the notion of digging deeper and going the extra mile to find out information that people don't want to tell you, that either institutions don't want to tell you or governments don't want to tell you, but that the public should know, and that the public is going to want to know. That's really where journalists can make their mark, and journalists can provide really the greatest value for what they do to a readership, to an audience. And yeah, that was a hell of a way to do it too, especially with a naked Dwayne Johnson being the spark that lit that fire.
That's crazy because you could have asked anybody else in that locker room, and like you could have asked Stone Cold Steve Austin. He would have gave who was the biggest star in professional wrestling then maybe ever, or like Triple H or the Big Show. They would have given you an answer, but you picked the person that actually had personal feelings into it because Dwayne played college football for the U and played in the Carrier Dome. That's just like crazy that you asked him that question. He got that. A lot. That's just fantastic. You could not have picked a better source to talk to because he actually had the passion to give an answer. And I doubt anybody else in that locker room would have cared where WrestleMania was the next year, but he did, and that's just crazy. Was it going to be the WrestleMania in 2000? Was that going to be the one? Or 2001?
It either would have been 2000 or 2000. Yeah, it actually would have been 2001, I think.
Okay.
So because they had already selected the site, so it would have been a year after. But
The 2000, which for anybody who's listening, that one was in the Astrodome in Houston. But oh my gosh, that would have been amazing, the Carrier Dome.
it would have been, and it never came to pass. And in 2001, and it never came to pass after that at all. So Syracuse definitely missed their opportunity if they were ever to have one.
Yeah, and the funny thing is a couple years ago they had a list came out of WWE. The cities they have A cities, B cities, and C cities, like which ones they consider the A cities and B cities based on attendance and interactions and things like that. And Syracuse was on the A list. Syracuse was a very important town for the WWF for most of its history because they always have shows there and tapings and things like that. So that back in 1999 it would have been an A+ city. So that's crazy that could have possibly happened. And that is crazy. So I know obviously you were at the Dallas Morning News. Was there a stop in between the Dallas Morning News and the Daily Orange I don't know about?
Yeah, there was. So I worked an internship at the Allentown Morning Call in Pennsylvania. I had an internship
Okay.
at the Dallas Morning News, and
Hmm.
I decided to actually leave college before I graduated. I had hoped to graduate early, and that fell short. But in the midst, I was putting out, dozens and dozens of applications at jobs, and just worked out that, I was 9 credits short. I was editor of the Daily Orange my second half of my junior year and first half of my senior year, and I was basically faced with this decision to make. Do I stay in school and turn down what was going to be what I thought a really amazing job covering the New Hampshire State House for a newspaper called the Eagle Tribune that circulates north of Boston and northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire? Do I take this job and leave school early without a degree, or do I stay in school for another semester and pay a lot more money that I didn't have and take basket weaving courses because I had already, basically finished my majors out? So took a risk and said, well, I'm going to take this job and I'll finish my degree taken, correspondence courses, or, there were like this crazy thing called online courses were available in, the year 2000, and maybe I could take some of them. And so I went and I covered the New Hampshire State House and New Hampshire politics for 2 years, and talk about a formidable, challenge and a formative experience. It was this, being 21 years old and 80 miles away from your newsroom and just a correspondent, just kind of left to his own devices to figure it all out. Had I not had those Tonawanda news experiences, had I not had those Daily Orange experiences, had I not had those internships, then I would have been completely, utterly adrift and lost. But I had learned enough along the way where I could kind of, fake it to make it. And it was such a ripe environment because people in New Hampshire, I don't know if you've ever been to New Hampshire or anyone listening has been to New Hampshire, but it's a highly engaged state. So people really treat politics like sport. And part of that is because they have such a rich, long history. They also have an incredibly representative state house, state senate, state house. And man, talk about a political gene pool that has been seriously watered down. There are 400 state representatives in the state of New Hampshire with a population of 1.3 million people. So, quick math, and I already told you before that I'm bad at math, but I think it works out to be, one state representative for every 4,000 people. So, you could have 2 or 3 state representatives just living down your street, and that's totally normal in New Hampshire. As a reporter, getting to cover all of this and also to like dig for crazy things happening that other reporters weren't necessarily picking up on. There was lots of room to run, and I tried to run as fast as I could and as far as I could.
I think one thing in journalism that we both learned probably from the Tonawanda News is that you always want to have like one more. If you and I are covering the same sporting event, I want to have one more reason why the Bills beat the Chiefs than you had, more in depth. And I think you want to have the same thing, that we're competing against each other. Like, I want to have like a key play that you don't have in your article. I'm sure you have the same way. Is that how you look at things, and when you're doing journalism?
Yeah, oftentimes, and it
Yeah.
it also depends on your competition. When I was up in New Hampshire, I didn't know anything, and I was coming in completely new. So really, the only advantage that I had was a fresh perspective, which may not seem like it's worth a whole lot, but when you're competing against reporters who literally know every single person in the legislature, and they know every political operative, and they've had
Yeah.
lunch 10 times over with every lobbyist and every activist. Well, I can't compete with that. But what I might be able to do is, for example, dig into these dusty documents in the Secretary of State's office to see if, I don't know, any of these 400 crazy state representatives are actually showing up for votes, and do an analysis for every single one and build a big spreadsheet and then see what you get. And then find out that, oh, well, there's these 24 people who almost never show up for work. Maybe that's worth writing an article about. And then you write an article about it, and everyone in the State House press corps who had been covering the press conference or writing the kind of pedestrian story about what the governor was saying is sort of like, holy crap, what's this 21-year-old kid over here doing with this crazy investigation? So that was where I tried to differentiate myself as much as possible. Is I would sit some mornings with my big 24-ounce coffee from across the street and try to wake up. We were an afternoon newspaper still, and which meant that I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning to work to a 11:30 a.m. deadline, so that we could get stuff in the afternoon newspaper. But I would sit every morning and try to think, all right, once I make deadline and write my daily story for the day, what can I spend my afternoon doing that's going to, just be different from everyone else and make everyone have to force them, basically, both in terms of readers and in terms of the competition, to say, all right, gotta notice this kid, gotta pay attention to this kid. He's not just some idiot from Buffalo, New York, who doesn't know anything about New Hampshire. He's actually doing something that's worth my while. So that was always the challenge for me to, I couldn't do it every day, couldn't do it every week, but definitely tried to do it, sometimes. And that was really, from a competitive standpoint, that was really exciting. That's when you felt like you were able to, school the old guys and teach them a thing or two, when they were usually the ones trying to teach you a thing or two.
Got it. Yeah. I think the biggest thing about it being the difference between a great journalist and just an okay or good journalist is something that you just said you did in New Hampshire, is you gotta drink water out of a fire hose. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's like, you gotta get thrown in the fire or sink and swim right away. And I think that's like something that you were talking about that you did, and you did a great job of in New Hampshire. How much now that you're in DC? How much of that? I mean, there's so many. To me, like, there's so much, like, we talk about fake news and whatnot, but there's so many people that can just go on Twitter and say something and people will believe it and not believe it. So what is it like now, just to do what you're doing with? First off, you could just kind of briefly describe exactly what you're doing in DC right now, and how you've been able to, keep your journalistic integrity when there's a lot of people out there who don't.
Yeah, and you can only worry about yourself and worry about the people around you. So there are so many news organizations, the news industry. I mean, people talk about the media as if it's some monolithic thing. I mean, the media has never been more segmented and more fragmented today than, I mean, it is today more than it really ever has been in history. I mean, anyone can start a quote unquote news organization. Anyone can have a news outlet. The technology has improved so that even somebody who knows nothing and has effectively no money can create something that has the look and the feel of legitimacy, even if it's not. So that can be dangerous on one hand. It can be also incredibly exciting because it can give rise to incredible curiosity and creativity and all the things that make a news environment, if you will, rich, and give people lots of things that they might not get otherwise. But not quite 2 years ago, in the midst of the pandemic, I had been working for 7.5 years at the Center for Public Integrity, which is an hardcore investigative news organization. Been around for more than 30 years, one of the oldest nonprofit news organizations in the country. And after 7.5 years there, things were changing in ways that I wasn't necessarily crazy with, at least in the context of my own work, and felt like it was time for a new challenge. So I had right before the pandemic began, I had a beer or three with one of my old friends from when I worked at Politico, the political publication based here in Washington, D.C., which is just all politics all the time. Its unofficial motto is "Win the day, beat the competition." Very, very aggressive and a very cool news organization in its own right. And he said, "Hey, reason I asked you here is because I'm going to be starting up a new Washington bureau for Business Insider." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, that seems pretty interesting." And the pandemic hadn't started yet, really. It seemed like a great potential opportunity. I had read Business Insider here and there. I, never really had like a overwhelming, interest in it. I'll be perfectly honest. But the more Darren, my boss, talked to me about it, the more I realized, whoa, something is going on here. They created a new investigations team. They created a new features team. They were hiring some really, experienced, talented journalists. They were kind of growing up, and part of that growing up process was creating a Washington bureau that they hoped to populate with more than a dozen editors and reporters to write really high-profile news, including enterprise and investigative stuff that had kind of become my bread and butter. So, yeah, in the middle of the pandemic, which started up, I didn't know if they were even going to go through with this, but they decided to quit my job. I had my son at home with me every day because he was doing remote online kindergarten at the time. My wife's a medical doctor and was having to go to work every single day. So, just kind of like, all right, let's talk about, you just said drink from fire hose. Well, this was baptism in fire. And it was baptism in a fire that was made even that much hotter by the fact that this was a presidential election year, and we had one of the craziest presidential races in U.S. history going on. So, yeah, it was an opportunity. So, all right, I will ask your question for you. Well, why, Dave, would you ever do something like that? And the answer, Ernie, is because sometimes you just really need to blow things up in your life, and you need to make a change.
Burn the boats.
Yeah, you
burn the boats.
You just got to do it, and I had to do this, and the opportunity to create a bureau from nothing with a couple of other people who I really loved and trusted and knew were going to be great compatriots in this endeavor was just too rich to pass up, and it was a very high risk, high reward type of scenario, and I'm happy to report, almost 2 years on that. The high risk has turned into incredibly high reward, and it has been an absolute blast working with my colleagues and doing what I think has been just, if I may be so bold, some of the most original and political journalism out there that really, does seem to be connecting with readers in a powerful way. We can see the numbers, and the numbers are big and the numbers are great, but it's much more rewarding to also hear from people and connect with people who are saying, wow, I had never read Business Insider. We are now officially Insider, I should note. But I had never read you guys before. I had never even thought of subscribing, and now I'm a subscriber and I read you every day. And that's really gratifying to know that in the midst of all of this question about what can you believe, what is fake and what is real, does somebody have an agenda when they're producing a story? We're coming out and just very openly and nakedly saying, yo, we're writing hardcore news. We're going to go after everyone. We're going to write stories that are exciting, that are colorful, that are not going to pull punches, that are really going to capture the drama and uncover the dirt of Washington, D.C. and make it real for you. We are writing, in a way, we're writing for that Tonawanda News-like audience. We're writing for people who may not necessarily be political junkies, but have a ton at stake when it comes to the decisions that get made via government, and have a ton at stake at who's in power and who's not, and just care about their communities, care about their families, care about their businesses, care about their country. And that's a lot of fun to be able to connect with people working for a publication like that.
Okay, really quickly, I gotta go through two more particulars, Dave. Thank you, and then we'll finish. We'll get going with some other stuff here. Join filmmaker Chris Colbert every Tuesday night for Gratcast. This week he'll be hosting a live conversation about Hollywood propaganda and what exactly that looks like in practice. That actually sounds like a lot of fun. Probably not for him, but for listeners. And then Sports Sushi on Thursday nights. Chop it up with our resident sports experts for a recap of all the NFL player movement so far, including who's return. Oh yeah, we're not talking about him. We're not. That person will never be named in this podcast, by the way. Sometimes Raw takes go too far, and Naomi Osaka's mid-match message provides an opportunity to reflect on where the line between heckling and harassment is. Join the show Thursday and tell the guys where your line is. All right, now that we got those are two great podcasts, by the way. Dave, as much as you can go into detail, what's the biggest story that you ever uncovered that you couldn't print?
Whew. Well, that's hard because I uncovered it. I want to print it.
Yeah. Have you ever been shot down by an editor or anybody?
Well, all right. Two answers to that question. One is not the answer you want, and I'll give you the best answer I can on the other point. There have definitely been stories where I've really had a fight, and you have battles like that at every kind of news organization that you're in, and I can be stubborn and I can be headstrong when I really get my teeth into something and really believe that it's a story that is worth time and effort and energy and resources and especially my news organization's money, which many news organizations that's going to be their bottom line question. All right, well, that sounds like a great idea, but how much is this going to cost? And how many people are we going to have to throw at this thing? So there have definitely been some battles that I've had to fight, which have led to sometimes a brick wall and other times, something that has really been profound. I mean, I would just self-servingly say that one of the projects that I've worked on that I am most proud of in my career is something that just published in December. And it's called Conflicted Congress. It's now a 80-some story-long project investigation in that period of time from December until now, looking at the ways in which members of Congress, through their personal investments, have conflicts with their public duties and responsibilities. Much of it focuses on their stock trades, and I would love for your listeners to go check it out, Conflicted Congress. But, I should say this started as an idea, and there were definitely some skeptics in the news organization about why we were focusing on this issue, and there seemed to be so many other things that we might want to focus on. But, it took a lot of, for some people convincing that, hey, no, actually, this is something that we do want to focus on. And, man, I couldn't have gotten more support, in the end from everyone on all the way up to the editor-in-chief, and that definitely took a lot of effort. So that's my first answer to your question. Yeah. The second answer is, I mean, there have been some stories that have dealt with some pretty crazy or pretty nasty stuff that you were 90% sure was true, and I just couldn't get there with the sourcing in order to print something that effectively accuse somebody. And I can think of one situation in particular from a few years back somebody who was involved potentially in what would have been, if it was true, a very explosive sex scandal that probably would have ended this person's career and potentially more, and just wasn't able to get there. And I take very seriously having absolutely everything bulletproof in a story. If it can be buttoned up, it must be buttoned up. And if you are going to, if you're going to go at the king, you better hit him. And if you can't get there, then as much as it pains you and as much as you wish something else would be the case, I'm never going to go and publish a story that I don't feel meets that standard. Now, that's my standard, and I'm happy to say that has generally been the standard for most of the news organizations that I worked for. And as much as you want to comfort comfort those who need comforting and afflict those who need afflicting, you can't do it unfairly, and you can't do it in a way that is going to hurt somebody's reputation when that could be incorrect, and also to bring disrepute on yourself or the people who are signing your paycheck. So that's always something that you have to consider, and that you have to weigh. And again, sometimes you get there and sometimes you don't. And those have been some of the hardest days, when you just know that you haven't been able to get there for one reason or another. You can't find the impenetrable proof that you need to be able to write a story of that sort.
Dave, do you have an extra 10 minutes? Or either that or I'm going rapid fire. Do you have an extra 10 minutes or so?
For you, Ernie, 11.
Well, we might go 11 hours way this is going. So if you can just really quickly, so you deal with a lot of BS, man. You deal with like corruption. You deal with like, it's not like you ever uncover someone like a politician has like hid $100,000, and the reason why is because he bought teddy bears for kids in the hospital. Everything that you deal with is like people acting like really like nefarious behavior. Like how do you cope with that between like all the people that you deal with who have like very shady practices, and also all the fake news, which is banging away at the real news? How do you cope with that? Like what do you do to kind of just get away when things get heavy?
Well, I mean, the dirty secret about covering politicians is that I actually, on a personal level, enjoy the company of most of the politicians that I deal with, and that includes those on the far left and the far right and everyone in between. I think that the thing that keeps you from going insane in a job like working in Washington, D.C., and I've been here for 13 years now, lucky 13, coming up, is that, yes, everyone is a politician, and with that comes certain stereotypes that more often or not can be true. And there's a certain expectation from the public that everyone is corrupt, but that's not true. And most people, I would say, on balance, who are in elected office, or who are appointees to a high position, say a chief of staff for a congressman, or a assistant secretary of state, you fill in the blank. They're doing it because they actually do believe in their heart of hearts that they're doing this for the good, be it the greater good or the good of their constituency or the betterment of their area or their country, whatever the case may be. And you may agree with them, you may disagree with them, but they're not, most of them, bad people, and they're very interesting in many cases to talk to. Some of them are just flat hilarious. A lot of them can be very needy. A lot of them can be very just inspiring in certain applications. So you kind of see a little bit of everything with politicians. But yeah, there are some who are just flat out bad dudes and scoundrels, and those are the ones that you go after, and those are the ones that you report on. They are definitely the exception to the rule, even if so often it seems like the opposite is true. And then there are also decent people who do bad things. And I try to focus as much as I possibly can, not on, is this person bad or good? Is this person worthy or not worthy? But focus on the actions that they're taking, because that is something that I can write about no matter who you are. And if you have violated a standard that you had set for yourself, if you have broken a campaign promise, if there is a law or a rule and you're supposed to follow it as a lawmaker, but you don't, then I'm very free and in my right, and I can go to sleep every night feeling great about life, having written a story about that, because that's my job. I'm in this to be a watchdog. I'm there to be people's eyes and ears in Washington and write stories that hopefully they're going to care about. They're going to reveal some truth about the way that government is working or the way that government is not working in some cases. So, but it's all balanced against each other. And if it was all bad all the time, then I'd probably be covering AAA baseball in New Mexico or something and not doing this.
You ever really quickly, just a yes or no answer? Did you ever have you ever thought about just going into sports and being a sports journalist, or no?
Yes. And when I was about 18 years old, and I decided that I was too much of a sports fan myself, and that I did not want to give up being a fan, really, for the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Sabres, which I knew that I might have to do if I went into sports journalism. That fandom would not be the same. And politics was something that I never wanted to root for a team in politics. I wanted to be the referee. So I get the best of both worlds. I get to be the referee, to put on my striped jersey when I go cover politics, and Team Red and Team Blue, they can battle it out. I'm gonna call fouls on both of them, but I can still go and have a 6-pack of blue at a Bills game and scream my head off for 8 hours, and do that today as much as I ever have at any point in my life, and I am so glad for it.
And Dave, I'll tell you firsthand, you made the right decision. At the end of 2004, when I had been working for the Tonawanda News for 8 years, plus a sports fan, I didn't want to see a sporting event forever. It took me a good 4 months. I'm telling you, when the Bills had that game against the Steelers to make the playoffs, the Willie Parker game,
God.
After that game, I swear I was just like so burnt out. I've never been more burnt out, and I could not be I could not do both. And I'm so glad.
I thought you were keeping it positive here today. I'm happy.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, that has nothing to do with the Bills game losing in the Steelers. It was just sports in general. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess. One question before we kind of move on to some fun stuff for a couple minutes. On your Twitter profile, it says DMs are open. What's the craziest DM that you've got? Not from like a bot, but from like what you would purport to be an actual person.
I try to be as accessible as possible, and that can be a little little interesting sometimes. You definitely get some characters who will slide their way into your DMs and write you some really out of the universe stuff, sometimes quite literally. I think the easiest one to remember would be maybe about a year ago, where somebody, in a way where I knew they were writing only to me. This was not like a cut and paste job, because they had made references to things that I wrote, and they used my name, and it was probably, Ernie, I don't know, 5,000 words long. I have no idea how much time this person spent writing it.
In a DM?
In a DM, and it just went on and on and like over and over. I don't know if there's a character limit or what in
That's
a
what
DM,
I was gonna say. I didn't know you could do that long.
But I mean, they just kept DMing over and over and over again, and it just went on for forever. And it was about the supernatural and about government conspiracy. It like, take the craziest X-Files episode you've ever watched and multiply it by like 1,000 infinity, and that's like 1/3 the way to what this was. And I like, what do you do with that? You can't do anything.
I thought you weren't good at math.
Well, I just proved that I'm not. But man, I try to respond to everyone, unless they're just being a complete, obnoxious troll. Unless I feel like I want to toy with them a little bit or whatnot, I will ignore that. But you just politely say, well, thank you for taking the time to write me. This is some interesting stuff, and I've read your message, and I will keep it in mind. I mean, there's not a whole lot that you can do, but so for everything like that, and then there was one person who was, very convinced, and there might have been some kernel of truth to that there was this kind of like deep state-ish thing going on where they had been fired and fired again, and they're being watched, and there's no way to prove this. So a lot of that stuff. But then oftentimes you'll get people who say, hey, I want to tell you something. I've got some information, and you get into a conversation with them and you ask them some questions and they give you some answers, and you explain that there's confidentiality that I will work with you on, and you take your conversation off Twitter and you take it to Signal or a safer place, or you have a phone conversation, or even in certain situations meet them in person. And it's not Watergate deep throat stuff here most of the time. Much of this is done, especially in the age of COVID, electronically, but that still happens too. And it all really just depends on the particular scenario, the particulars of the situation, and you treat them on their merits, and you try to be just the best listeners you can and the best sleuth that you can whenever you get a tip like that.
I like the fact that we've used some words that we've scoundrel, sleuth. We've used some words that aren't usually used. I think that's my favorite. I mean, of all the great stuff that we've used some fantastic. Our vocabulary today. I don't want to like put ourselves over, but like I think our vocabulary today has been like 10 out of 10. And I say that as I flub the word vocabulary. So great job, Ernie. That's what happens. That's exactly what happens when you're not humble. We got a couple minutes left. There's two really. I mean, Dave is probably the biggest Bills fan I know. Besides more than I am. Dave is, you were a season ticket holder back home for how many years, Dave, you and your family?
Well, we started in '89 after the '88 season, where we went to the AFC Championship. We know how that turned out. And
the Earl Tucker game where he flubbed the punt.
Oh, dude. Yeah. But we knew that this was a team that was going to be on the rise, and so '89 to '96, and we got rid of our season tickets. My senior year of high school was the last time that we had season tickets, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to all the games for because I was at Syracuse, but that paper route money. My parents said you're not getting season tickets, because I had begged and I had pleaded and I had just petitioned them every which way I could to get season tickets, because we'd go to 2, 3, 4 games a year from the time I was 5 years old on. 1984 was the first.
What was your first game, by the way?
Bills game. Bills versus Jets, 1984.
Okay, gotcha. Mine was Bills versus Dolphins, 1983. But go ahead.
Wait, you beat me by a year, but you got a year on me, so it's.
I think I got a less responsible dad, because who takes their 4-year-old to a Bills game? But
no, you have a more responsible dad, great Buffalonian.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I had never not gone to a Bills game during a season, at least one Bills game in person, until the first year of COVID, and that was hard. It's been really, really hard. But yeah, our season tickets, we were there for literally every home game, including the playoff games, and Super Bowl 25. We went to Super Bowl 25 and saw what was there to be seen. With enough said, Dave. Yeah, no, we all know what's going on here. Really quickly, what is your favorite Buffalo Bills memory? My favorite memory, well, I can tell you this very, definitively. Favorite memory from a game was the AFC Championship game before the first Super Bowl, 51-3 versus the Raiders, and that game was so. Well, there will never be a game that good until the Bills win the Super Bowl, which they will. Let's establish that here right now. Until that happens, this game will always be my favorite game, because you knew that. I don't know. I had no question in my mind that the Bills were going to go to the Super Bowl, and I was going to be there to see that happen. So that was number one. Number two, the first Gulf War had just begun.
Mhm.
And you had to wait in line. I don't know how long we waited in line. It was a very long time, and it was not a particularly warm day. And everyone got there starting and lining up around like 10 o'clock to get into the stadium. And I believe that they opened the stadium up significantly earlier because everyone had to go through enhanced screening, and this was unprecedented. And there were all these like, is there going to be a terrorist attack or a bomb going off? Is Saddam Hussein going to, ride in on a jet? We had no idea. So there was that. So anyway, everyone was in the stadium by like 11:30 for a 1 o'clock game. And well, what do you do at 11:30 if you're all 80,000 of you in the stadium together on a cold day? Well, you do one of three things. You drink beer, which many people did. You stand and you bounce around because it's crazy and unique and exciting. And number three, you just start, yelling your head off. And you kind of had to because you had these helicopter gunships that were circling the stadium. Were you there, Ernie, or were you watching this on TV?
No, I was watching on TV, and the funny thing is my go ahead. I'll tell my story. You have to finish your story.
Well, there's snipers on the roof of the press box and just all this stuff. So when you're a preteen, I mean, an already heady situation as any Bills game would be, like is exciting as almost anything you could do. This was just like on a whole new, absolute, complete plane of existence for sports or really anything else. And as soon as the Raiders walked out of the tunnel, every single person, if they hadn't been convinced up until that point, they knew that they were going to lose. And then when the Bills came out to follow them, every single person there then knew that the Bills were going to win. And it was just the most joyous, incredible, raucous, beautiful experience that I've ever had at a sporting event. Nobody sat, I don't think, in the whole stadium for the entire first half. The only time anyone sat down was at halftime. It was just this sense of collective fate and inevitability in the most wonderful of ways that I've really ever experienced. And the whole second half was just a party to end all parties. And when it all went down, it was just sort of like winning the Super Bowl without winning the Super Bowl. And it was the last moment that we ever had where we weren't we were pre Super Bowl 25, 26, 27, and 28. But I'm glad I had that moment, not just because it was before all of that happened, but I'm glad that I was there so that I could feel that and experience everything that happened in the next 4 years and everything that happened since, and be here now, talking to you and knowing that, hey, we've gone through all of that. And now here we are on the precipice of something that truly is great for a sports team that means more to its city than any other football team means to its city. And that has no knock to any other football team. It's just, as far as I'm concerned, a fact about Buffalo. And that to me is worth every point of pain, punishment, and penance for being a Bills fan between the years of 1995-ish and 2018 or so. And now, man, it is sweet to feel like we can start to do that again, and that there may be another AFC Championship game, 51-3 of that sort in our future.
Well, two things really quickly. Then I'm going to ask one last question about someone that we both love. Number one, I was at 47-17 Bills versus Patriots. And I think that's going to be like this for now, like the generation below us, that's going to be their 51-3. But it was in no way, shape, or form 51-3. It was just an absolute joy. It was like a therapy session. It really was, because it was just like the Bills went. I mean, obviously they played a perfect game, and we're sitting near, like, the realization of the Patriots fans that day, like. In '96, when I walked out of that Bills Jaguars game, I was at that playoff game. The look on my face had to have been, it's over, right? I mean, whether I knew it or not, it was over. And the look of resignation on the fans of the Patriots were, Mac Jones is not Josh Allen. We no longer have Tom Brady. Bill Belichick, who I'll give credit to, is the best defensive coach in the history of football. He has no idea how to defend Josh Allen. And just the looks of realization on their face, it was the most cathartic moment ever. Having said that, it was not 51-3 in any way, shape, or form. That was just a division. That was just a divisional game, you know.
But it was a thing of beauty, and you nailed it, man. Like I am so happy for those 11 and 12 and 13-year-old kids in Buffalo who are experiencing something that just skipped basically the guts of a whole generation, and the only thing that they really know right now is like, oh, the Bills are good and they're getting better, and that just makes me so happy because every time I go back to Buffalo, I will see something new, I will see something exciting. There's just an energy and a dynamic nature to the city that we had all just kind of hoped maybe one day, 50 years in the future, would happen when we were there in the 90s. And to see it, hey, city's not a perfect place by any stretch of the imagination, and a lot to do. But man, it's amazing to see just all of that happening and being on a parallel track or somewhat of a parallel track with the success of the group of people that in a way serve as the representative, the ambassador of Buffalo to the country and the world, as the Bills do.
Absolutely, and really quickly, so I have a friend of mine. He runs PR for Matchroom Boxing. Matchroom Boxing is a promotional company. It's based out of England, but they have a U.S. thing now. A friend of mine named Anthony Weaver. He is, and I'm gonna have a story on this in the Niagara Gazette soon. Shameless plug. So he moved from London 3 years ago to New York City, and every year he goes to a playoff game. He likes going to a wild card game. He went to Green Bay, a bunch of other places. He just so happened to go to the Bills Patriots game, and now he's a Bills fan for life. And he doesn't know this, but I have a Bills Mafia shirt getting sent his way to New York City. But just he does the enthusiasm that he had of being at that game, of just that game literally created an adult fan, which is the coolest thing ever.
That was amazing, awesome. And you could tell me stories about how people become Bills fans from far-flung places, and the one you tell is going to be better than the last one I heard, and they're all going to be great.
Yeah.
I'll have to tell you about my guy I met on a trip to the Northwest Territories of Canada, who grew up in Hamilton and became a Bills fan because he used to, in the 80s, hear the broadcast of rare nighttime Bills games bouncing off the ionosphere from the Buffalo Bills radio broadcast in Buffalo that would reach 500 some odd miles away. I mean, it's like, it just defies imagination how some people become Bills fans, and yeah, that too warms my heart.
I just love the fact that a random statement that like Josh Allen is like, okay, Jim Kelly's he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, but let's face facts. There's stories about Jim Kelly that make you, you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of things about him and his past, and you're like, yeah, he's not really he was a hero on the field, not so much off the field. Josh Allen is that dude in every way, shape, or form.
He's a remarkable guy, and yes. Every year he's in Buffalo, he just seems to be more and more of the real deal. Now, I am by nature going to be skeptical about lots of things. I get paid to be one.
Yeah.
But man, that's why I'm a Bills fan. I want to believe, I do believe, and not only is he an incredible quarterback and certainly one of the best in the league, but just he's just he's a guy. He's a Buffalonian. Like, let's put it what it is. He really,
absolutely.
He really is one of us.
And I happened to meet his family at Lambeau in 2018, and they're the same exact way. Just a down-earth, good people. Honestly, they said we were from Buffalo. I would have believed it. I've taken up way too much of your time, Dave. I'm just going to ask you ask you one more question, and I'm going to tell my story first because I know your story is way better than mine. Someone that we both got to know over the years and know and love is the late great Van Miller, who was a Bills broadcaster for probably 30, 40 years, something like that. So I'm going to tell my story first, and I want you to tell your Van Miller story because yours is better. I know your story. I used to be a bartender at Payne's Restaurant going through college, and he would come in with his wife like once a week, and he'd come in, and he was always polite to me, and he, please, thank you, great tipper, but he never called me Ernie. I had a name tag on. He never called me Ernie. He called me Dan. He called me Kevin. He called me Bob. Never called me Ernie. And then I started going to Bill's training camp. I would cover that intermittently for the Tonawanda News or the Gazette or something like that. And I'd see him, and he'd walk up and he'd shake my hand or give me a hug, but he'd never call me Ernie. And though finally, the last time I covered training camp was 2004 or 2003. I'm sorry, that was his last year. And I was talking to him, and I'm like, man, congrats. I did a story on him actually being his last year doing the radio commentary. And I go, I said, Van, thank you very much for your time. He goes, oh, Ernie, no problem. And I just started laughing. And he's like, what's so funny? I go, Van, I've known you since 1997. You never called me by my name. And he just like winked at me and walked away. He's like, joke's on you, kid. Like he knew my name the whole time, but he had no interest in ever calling me by my name just to mess around with me.
That's the best story I've heard all month. I love that story, and that's so Van. That's just so.
Yeah, exactly. So what is it? I know you have a great story or two, so go ahead. Floor is yours.
Oh well, I ran into Van on several occasions, but actually one of the first was one of the most random. I was at the then Perkins restaurant, which was kind of a Kenmore West hangout, and I was maybe a sophomore, junior, and there with a couple of friends, and there's Van Miller with his wife eating dinner, and I just thought this was like, wow, this is Van Miller. This is the sound, the embodiment of the soundtrack of my sports loving life. This couldn't get any better, and this was still of the age where we would turn off the TV audio back in the 80s before we had season tickets. We would turn off the TV audio and we would put on the Van Miller audio because it was just so superior. And my father would bring like the old Sony Walkman headphones with like a radio tuner, and he would listen in the stadium to the Van Miller broadcast because that was a thing, and a thing that my dad did. And of course, I would steal them sometimes and do the same thing. Getting to meet Van was really special, but I had to introduce myself. So went up and I don't know what point in our meal we sat down and we ordered and whatnot, and I went over and Van had like some blue cheese on his face. So I look at him and I'm just kind of stunned, and he looks at me and he smiles, and all I could say was, Mr. Miller, you got some blue cheese on your face there. So he wipes it off and he laughs and he says, oh, well, are you here with your friends? I'm like, yeah, it's my friend Kelly and my friend Joel, and we're from Kenmore West. So we start up a conversation. So I swear, I mean, we were there for probably 2.5 hours, just yucking it up. He was having probably 10 times the fun I think that we were having, and we were having literally the time of our life. Just going at it. I mean, here's the guy who probably more than any person in all of Buffalo, if you heard a voice, if everyone had a 5-second clip of their voice in Buffalo, and you had to pick out one that you absolutely knew, but you knew none of the people personally, most people would pick out either Rick Jeanneret's voice, the voice of the Sabres, almost certainly Van Miller would win the contest. And this guy, a local legend, a living legend, is sitting there spending 2 hours with a bunch of high school kids who he's never met before, and just holding court, answering questions, talking about the Bills, telling stories. I don't know if he ever got my name at that point or not, and I'm sure he would have purposely got it wrong. But at the end of it all, he said, I said, I have to thank you. He's like, no. I have to thank you. This was the best part of my day. It's so wonderful talking to people who were, who love the Bills and who are doing so well in school. And he just went on and on and on about like us. And that was, I'm just getting chills thinking of it, that it was never about him. It was always about the fans. It was always about the people. It was always about people from Buffalo. It was always about giving. And he was just such a giving guy. And when we went to pay our check, the waiter came by. He's like, well, you got nothing to pay because Van picked up your tab for all of us. So that was really something that I think just kind of, in a nutshell, tells you a little bit about what Buffalo is like, all the way up to the people who are local stars for every right reason.
Yeah, and by the way, really funny story with that is I remember one time at Payne's, like somebody made him a drink that he didn't like, and he said like somebody's random name, but like someone that didn't work there, so like Tim or Bob, something like that. He meant me, but he didn't know my he didn't know my name. He's like, have that Frank guy, have that Frank guy, to make my drink, and he didn't even, and everyone was like, who the hell is Frank? But it was actually me. So
Amazing.
cool. So Dave, well, first off, we should have known better that we were going to go over our time between you and I chopping it up. So I appreciate you first off coming on. You were just an amazing guest. You're an amazing friend. You're an ambassador to the city of Buffalo, and you just do an awesome job with what you do. Dave, where can people find you and your publication on Twitter?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Dave Levinthal. That's DaveLevinthal. And you can go to insider.com and find all of the stuff that we are doing there. And you can get us on Twitter at Business Insider or at This Is Insider.
Well, Dave, I can't thank you enough for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We could have went for another couple hours. I'm not sure if the listeners wanted to hear us for another couple hours, but we sure as heck could have chopped it up. So thank you very, very much for being the first guest on Inside the Distance with Ernie Green. And I will see everybody next week. We are out.